Thank you so much. Yes, thank you for that introduction. Yes, that the introduction was correct. In fact, in 2016, I actually quit my job in corporate HR to become the only American and the only female and the only blonde academy football coach or soccer coach for the Adidas Game Day Academy and for Paris Saint-Germain, the PSG Academy in Bangalore, India. And so I quit my job and I moved over to India and began a new adventure coaching with their teams there. And what I found whenever I came to the academy is a lot of times our teams would operate under a very strict command obey dynamic. So oftentimes our team members would come to sessions and they would stand in a line, kick a ball, wait for instruction. And they would come to our sessions and they would stand in a line, kick a ball, wait for direction. And they would come to our sessions and they would stand in a line, kick a ball, wait for feedback. And while this may be an efficient way to teach a skill, in a game scenario, it was a disaster. Oftentimes, our players within the course of a match would kick the ball perfectly, exactly the way that we taught them. And then, before the play was even over, they turned to the sideline to the coach for further direction and feedback. See, they had mastered the task, but they didn't quite understand how it applied to the overall game scenario. Well, it might be easy to think of this as an international academy in sports with kids. How often do we go to work, receive a task, and wait for instruction? And we found that the way that we were giving feedback significantly altered the performance that we had. Now, this wasn't a dramatic change. We didn't need to completely alter our communication. What we actually did was a slight pivot. So rather than stand in a line, kick a ball, wait for instruction, we provided challenges. So from here, kick the ball to knock down those 3 cones. Because in order to do that, you're going to have to kick with power and precision. And in a game scenario, whenever you pass, whenever you kick, whenever you shoot, you're also going to have to kick with power and precision. And so we altered our communication from looking at only the what and the how, kick the ball, kick it like this. We actually altered that from what and how to our what and our why. And from this altered communication, I actually saw some of the most heated debates I'd ever seen amongst 7-year-olds trying to decide if the best way to kick the ball was with the infoot or the laces. In reality, both cases were right. And so what we had done is we had expanded our toolboxes of resources so that we could best complete the goal. And in your organization, you can also alter your communication to best create an environment for great performance. See, before we can talk about performance feedback, we must first talk about our performance environment and specifically our performance expectations. Does your team know what is expected of them and why that is important? Whenever you are beginning a new project, if you are getting ready to do a sprint, if you are getting ready to take on a new client, coming into a new team, what are the expectations and why is that important? I know we don't have a lot of time today, but I do want to give you the opportunity to actually clarify what those expectations are. So this is an activity that I do whenever I come into a new team or we start a new project. Or we'll actually do this at the beginning or in a retrospective. And so what I want you to do is I want you to take a piece of paper and I want you to draw 1 line across and I want you to draw 3 lines vertically. Okay, so you're going to draw 1 line across, horizontal line, and then 3 lines vertically. What I want you to do is I'm going to give 15 seconds per box. And in that box, I want you to draw an expectation, a performance expectation that you have of your team members. And we're going to keep this in mind as we continue our talk. This could be an expectation in performance outcomes. It could be an expectation in performance behaviors, in attitudes, how people have meetings, whatever performance expectations you as a leader have of your team. I've been talking just a minute, so you can get out your piece of paper and your writing utensil. I'm going to get my watch ready. And of course, all right. And on the count of go, or on the count of 3, I want you to go. At the end of 15 seconds, I'm going to say next. You have to leave the first box and immediately move to the second box to draw a different expectation that you have of your team. By the end of this, you'll have your top 8 performance expectations that you have of your team member. Okay, ready, set, go. What is a performance expectation that you have of your team? And start some mood music, royalty free. What's an expectation that you have of your team? Next. You're going to draw a performance expectation of your team members. Next. This isn't a lot of time. It's not a lot of time to think of what those expectations are. Next. What's a performance expectation? What are you expecting of your team? Next. Next. Almost there. What's a performance expectation of your team members? Keep that in mind. All right, next. 1 or 2 left. Last one. What is a performance expectation that you have of your team? And stop. All right. That was a quick activity, but it's a really powerful activity. And it's something I find even whenever I'm coaching teams and whenever I am working within different projects. You have to ask, okay, what are the performance expectations that we have? Now, I challenge you to look at your piece of paper. Are there any expectations that may have surprised you that, wow, that's in my top 8? Maybe there's some that you look and might say, okay, am I communicating? This is my challenge to you. Are you communicating those expectations in your team? Do they know that this is a huge expectation of them? I also challenge you to, in your team, flip this prompt around and say, what expectations does my team have of me? And this is a quick 2-minute activity. If you want to, and sometimes I might make that 30 seconds, maybe 25 seconds. So I'll give a little bit more time. No more than 30 seconds. But I will give that prompt to set expectations and to clarify expectations within teams. See, uncommunicated expectations are oftentimes doomed to be unmet expectations. So we want to make sure that we are communicating the performance expectations first before we are giving our performance feedback. Now, even if we set the expectations for great performance, we have created an environment for great performance, sometimes expectations can still go unmet. And so, how do we address unmet expectations? The first thing that I do, again, at the beginning, whenever we're coming into a team, and what we did within our football teams, was to have proactive conversations. We had proactive conversations. Now, a proactive conversation goes something like this. At some point in this working relationship, I'm probably going to fail you. At some point in our project, there's going to be tension. There's going to be heat. And so while our emotions are low now, let us proactively discuss how we're going to handle that situation whenever it inevitably arises. And this does a couple things. First, it sets an expectation for some sort of tension. And sometimes people are hesitant to bring up tension because they don't want to admit that the frustration is there. But by having a proactive conversation, you're allowing some permission to bring up that tension, to discuss it. The second thing that a proactive conversation does is it creates a game plan. It creates a script. So you know how this conversation is going to go. Sometimes there's a bit of ambiguity of how a conversation, a tough conversation, is going to go. But by having a proactive chat, a script of how that conversation is going to go, and you set those expectations of how you will address the issue and how you will respond if attention is brought to your attention. And this actually helps us in one of the greatest barriers to great performance feedback, and that is the fundamental attribution error. Now, the fundamental attribution error is really just a fancy way of saying that too oftentimes we judge other people by their behaviors, by their performance, while we judge ourselves by our intentions. We see this all of the time. We see, oh man, they did that wrong. They didn't make that pass right. They missed that goal. And we look at their performance. But if my players were shooting the ball, if they made a bad pass, they look at their intention. They look and see, well, this is what I meant to do. This is what I was trying to do. We see the fundamental attribution error. So a way that you can address the fundamental attribution error is to actually ask the question, what was your intention whenever you did that? Simply that question alone can change the entire dynamic of addressing unmet performance expectations. In fact, I was working with a team just a few months ago that had a team member that was seen as very abrupt in meetings. Some even said malicious. Some even said abrasive. So, question, what is your intention whenever you're speaking up at meetings? And the intent was to be passionate, was to be persuasive. And so what we found by this question is that there was a knowledge gap between intended behavior and perceived behavior. And so we were able to enter into more of a coaching situation and bring the two closer together. So we began by asking, what was your intention whenever you're doing that? Finding out what's going on and what you can do to help. And in this situation, it's important that we get very specific as we're giving our performance feedback to get strategic. We want to get specific to get strategic. In fact, there are three major purposes to performance feedback, and it's important that we get specific to get strategic in all three of them. The first purpose of performance feedback is to encourage desired performance. As a football coach, oftentimes I hear people come up to players and come up to teams and say, good job, well done, you're doing great, keep up the good work. And while this may sound really nice, it's not specific enough to get really strategic. What behavior do you want repeated? What behavior are you encouraging to do well again? Saying good job might sound nice, but it's not specific enough to really get strategic. If you don't know why something's working when it's working, you might not know how to fix it whenever it's broken. The next purpose is to correct performance. So in the same regard, I had some team members that said, hey, we just need to play better. And while that may be correct, it's not specific enough to get very strategic. And then the third purpose is to coach or to build upon performance. And so whether you are encouraging, correcting, or coaching behavior, it's important that we get as specific as we can to get strategic. Now, giving you a lot of information about performance feedback, I'm going to leave you with one 30-second story. Whenever I came to coach football, I had one lad that came up to the field and he said, pass, pass, pass. He was about 6 years old, and I looked at him and I noticed that he was saying the word pass whenever he was miles away from the action, whenever the other team had the ball, and even whenever he had the ball, yelling pass, pass, pass. And so I looked and I said, why are you yelling pass? And he looked and he said, Miss Ember, I do not know what it means. I only know that it's a football word. And it can be really easy to hear all of these words that we've talked about today and say proactive conversations, fundamental attribution, what, why, performance expectations, woo! Because it sounds, these are really good words, but if we're using them out of context, then they can actually be detrimental to our conversation. So I encourage you to first set performance expectations, clarify what and why, equip your team to meet those performance expectations, and help your team to thrive. If you do that, you can actually work with your team to say the word pass, move forward, and score really big goals. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Amber Vanderburg. I would love to connect, and feel free to reach out if you have any other questions.